Mandy. Can you hear me now, as they say?
I can hear you, and we have our slides up.
Okay, that means we're a go. Marsha finally got her act together. So welcome everyone to our session for today, and that's saving more for your kids and your grandchildren by avoiding some costs of probate for your estate when you're gone. The voice you're hearing is Marsha Goetting, and I'm the Family Economics Specialist with Montana State University. And I'm delighted to have you here today, and because I want to share with you, this is an example of your land grant university at work. We have programs that we present that are sometimes pre-COVID out there amongst you, and now we're doing a series of webinars. And I'm joined today by our co-host, Mandy Reed. And Mandy, you can wave there so they know who you are. Mandy is an extension agent in Wheatland County. And if you don't know that county, that is the one that has Harleton in it. Okay, it's a place I go through on my way to Lewistown, but I'm sure it's more famous than that. And then we also are delighted to have with us two of our extension agents that are what we might call on opposite ends of estate planning for their children. We've got Katrin here, and Katrin is our extension family and consumer science agent in Cascade County. And she's on the, we'll call the younger end, because she has one child and has some ideas for us about estate planning. Then we also have Jane Wolery. And Jane is our Teton County Extension agent. And I guess I would put her on the other end, as she has now two what we would call adult children. So they're going to bring us two different perspectives on doing estate planning for minor children. We want to welcome those of you that have registered, and as you can see, you're scattered throughout the state of Montana, which is really, really good. We're pleased about that. And then we also want to give a warm welcome to the individuals that happen to be joining us today that are out of state. So welcome to Montana, where it's really cold. We've had minus 21 through the week. Woo! So, Mandy, I think we're going to have some engagement tools today. Why don't you explain those to our participants?
All right, yeah, thank you, Marsha. It has warmed up today, so I think we were up to 0 or maybe even a little warmer. So we're going to use 3 engagement tools today, and the first one we're going to use is the chat room. So that's a place for you to put your questions or comments as we're going through. Sometimes we'll ask a question and ask you to enter your answer into the chat room. So that's located on the right-hand side of your display there, and you can just put your questions in there. Also, we're going to remain on the webinar for 15 minutes after we're done so that you can put your questions in there and things that you want answered that we maybe don't answer during the webinar. So there's a chance for you to use that. The second one that we're going to use is our poll questions. So we'll start right now with our first poll. And so we would like to know, as a result of last week's webinar, what action, if any, did you take? So you'll see that that poll is open, and you can go ahead and click your answer in there, and then make sure you hit submit, or else we won't be able to see your answers. So we'll take just a second and let you put your answer in there for your poll question, and then make sure you hit submit, and then we'll see what the responses are.
And don't forget, on this particular poll, you can check more than one. I would be thrilled to see that you've done a whole bunch of things, wouldn't we, Mandy?
Great. Yeah, thank you for that reminder, Marsha. Yes, so if you did more than one thing, you can check all of them. Okay, so we have our results up there. And I see that, so if you can engage in the polls and engage in the chat, it'll make the webinar more interesting for you and more interesting for us. So make sure that you do that if you can. So Marsha, will you go ahead and explain our third engagement tool?
Well, I would be delighted to do that, because I do have this one that's my favorite, and that happens to be wildflowers. And I like to use those as reminders. You know, you got a name of a wildflower, and if I can connect it with something I'm talking about, I hope that will enable you to remember it a little bit better. And just so you know, I don't know if I've shown you this for those that have been here in the past, but people think I pick the flowers, and no, I don't. We take photographs of these flowers in place. And so there I am with my umbrella on top of a rock because I found a rock beard tongue, and it was so exciting to take that photo. So here's the very first flower that we're going to be taking a look at. And the reason I like this one is it's a steer's head. And what it's telling us is I'm going to steer you to an awareness about these things. And so is Mandy, because we both want you to know what are some ways that you can transfer property and not have to pay a lot in probate fees. Now, this is a beautiful flower, and it's one that I saw when I was just starting early. And I used it then to send to one of my friends' mother who had cancer. And I thought, I'll buck her up. I'll make her feel better that I sent her a card. And would you believe what I sent Damaris?
Oh, no.
A mountain death camas. I was mortified. I thought, how could I do something like this? But this was the days before I knew all the names of my wildflowers. And she was so sweet, though. She wrote a letter and she said, Marsha, we lost 7 sheep in the Lima Mountains as a result of the mountain death camas. So I'm going to use it to think of death, I guess, and PODs. PODs are payable on death designations. And you can use these on your financial accounts at your credit union and at your bank. And these can be on your savings accounts, checking accounts, certificates of deposit, and you can even put a POD on your United States savings bonds. So these are really, all of us have something like this. And why pay probate fees on the value of what those happen to have in them? Okay, so the only thing that happens at death is your POD beneficiary will need to take an affidavit of death, okay, and a photograph of themselves, you know, like your driver's license. And what the institution will do is go ahead and make a check out to you as one of the POD beneficiaries. So you can let your heirs know about that kind of thing. Now, you can also POD those you parents and grandparents out there to one of those custodial accounts that we talked about in an earlier program. And this is under the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. But don't forget, age 21, that's theirs. And if you already have a sense that your children or grandchildren maybe aren't the best managers of money, maybe this isn't the way to go, and you could consider PODing to a testamentary trust. Okay, so if you have a testamentary trust, you have appointed a trustee, and you've had that discussion with the trustee, and you're going to give directions. I want you to distribute what's in this trust to my children or grandchildren when they reach age 20, 25, 35, or like we discovered with one lady, 65. My goodness. Okay. So my tip from the mountain death camas is take advantage of those PODs. It's not a form that you create. It's one that's created by the financial institution. And the publication that we've got that's called Non-Probate Transfers, which is in one of our rooms that you've got there for minor children, that will tell you some more information and just give you an example of the form that you would need to fill out to accomplish your goal. Oh, here's another idea of something that we're trying to do to engage you. We're calling it estate planning trivia. So your first question for estate planning trivia, oh, and why would you want to answer this? If you're the first person that gets the answer correct, you get a wildflower note card that's blank on the inside so you can use it for any occasion. So here's our question. What is the meaning of, and I hope I say it right, escheats. What is the meaning of escheats? Now, don't cheat and go to the web. You just have to answer it right now. Can't do that. So, okay, Mandy, how about a Todd? I talked about pods. How about you tell us about Tods?
All right. Yeah, so we're going to also use the meadow death camas as a reminder when we talk about our TODs. And TODs are transfer on death registrations. And so again, we're going to avoid probate with our transfer on death registration, and we can use those for our stocks, bonds, mutual funds. And so what will happen is upon death, then all of those assets will transfer to the beneficiary without probate. So while you're living, they're in your name, and then upon death, those will just transfer over to the beneficiary. You can also name a trust as your beneficiary. So if a testamentary trust has been established, remember we talked about those last week. If that's been established, then upon your death, then those accounts will transfer into the testamentary trust. So remember we talked about the sugar bowl. So this is just putting those assets into the sugar bowl. Also, you want to think about our trustee. So our trustee then is going to distribute those funds to the beneficiary. And remember, our beneficiary is going to decide, what should I do with those? So Marsha, I'm going to ask you, what would you do with the property? Are you going to keep it or are you going to sell it?
Well, that might depend on my situation at the time. I think I would tend to keep them and hope that the market goes up as I hold them, because I don't have them now. I mean, I didn't have them before, and so I might be tempted to spend the money. So I would keep them. Now, would you sell them if it was you?
I don't know. It would just depend on where it was or where I was and what I needed. And so, but maybe because I kind of want to invest in my home a little bit too. So
Yeah. Well, I was doing a program and I had a whole bunch of people there, and I asked the same question. And there was one lady that raised her hand, and actually there were several, and they said, "Oh no, you need to keep them, because if you sell them, you're going to have to pay a huge capital gain tax." And I went, "No, no, no. Have you heard of the stepped up basis? You see what happens with all this stock. Let's say you paid $1 for it, and now it's worth $1 million. Oh, wouldn't that be good? But anyway, this dollar steps up to $1 million. And if I sold it at $1 million, I wouldn't have any capital gain tax. So that's something to keep in mind with your TODs. It is them that'll make the decision. But hey, there's nothing wrong with the discussion ahead of time of letting them know about the step up in basis.
that's a great point, Marsha. And sometimes we think we know something and we don't know to ask. So thank you for bringing that up, because sometimes people are worried about something that they don't need to. So our tip from our meadow death camas is to use a transfer on death to control the distribution of stocks and bonds and mutual funds, and to avoid probate fees at death. We also have another poll question. So now that you know about pods and TODs, will you place them on your financial accounts? So let us know if that's something you think you'll do. Yes. If that's something that doesn't sound right for you, a no. And if you've already done this, let us know that too, please. So we'll take just a minute. Your poll should be open. And again, make sure you hit submit.
I know I'm biased and know what they say. I want to hear a certain answer. But on the other hand, if I hear the other answer, I'd like to know why. So you could even enter that in the chat room.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so let's take a look here. Well, we've got 33% that said yes, so that's great. We did have an individual that said no, and if you would enter that in the chat room, it would help us understand. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It's just I want to understand why, and then I could use that in a presentation in the future to say, well, now here's a good reason why you wouldn't do something like that. So,
And Marsha,
help
I
us
forgot
out.
to mention, our chat room is no one will see, no one will know who entered anything into the chat room. So it'll be confidential and we won't say your name. So
Yeah,
you don't have to
that's
worry about that. And I apologize, I forgot to mention that right off this morning.
Yeah, and I did too. And that's a very good point, because that's why on all of our estate planning meetings, we just kind of have this rule that the chat room is just for us. And that way you don't have to worry about your sister-in-law and Ekalaka knowing what it is that you said. So thank you for that, Mandy.
All
Okay.
right. Yeah. So Marsha, tell us about the Todd with two Ds.
Okay, I couldn't believe the legislature would have Todds and Todds. So I refer to it as a Todd with two Ds. And I'm going to use the Explorer's Gentian for this one. And isn't that a beautiful flower? You know, I'm biased because, of course, I took the photograph. But this one you'll see in August. It's a late bloomer. You can find it in almost any of the forests, but also Glacier National Park. So Explorer, I'm going to explore with you a transfer on death deed for real property. I didn't think I'd live to see the day that our legislature would say we could take a $6 million hunk of land and transfer that at death, and we wouldn't have to probate that. Woo, how exciting. So let's take a look at that. This became effective as of October 1st of 2019. Now, you may have heard about beneficiary deeds, and this is what we had before we had a transfer on death deed. The beneficiary deed that you did, if you've already done one, is still good. They're not say you have to redo it. No, we don't have to do that. It's just from now on, as in October 1st, they're going to be as transfer on death deeds. Now, remember this. You name a TODD beneficiary. It's not theirs until you are gone. They are not an owner. If I make you my beneficiary, Mandy, you can't sell my house out from under me. And you also can't use my property for collateral for a loan that you might be trying to get. It's not yours until I'm, as the phrase goes, dead as a doornail. Okay, so where do we file our transfer on death deed? It's in the clerk and recorder's office in the county where the land is located. Okay, so if you happen to have a situation where you've got land in Flathead County, you file there. And then if you also have, say, a farm in Richland County, and if it has oil on it or gas, that would be even better, wouldn't it? Well, you would end up filing then in Richland County. That's what we have to do. So you land barons may have to file several of those. Now, let's explore who could be your beneficiaries. Well, of course, your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, relatives, friends. Hi, Mandy. I'm a friend. I've always wanted a place that I could put my horses, you know. So explore the possibility too of naming a testamentary trust. And this could be one that's established upon your death so that the house goes into the trust because you want the children to be able to live there, or whatever reason. There's one, you know, your grandchildren as well. Now, of course, I've got to tell you the downside of a transfer on death deed. What we've discovered is that the title companies are not issuing insurance for a whole year on this land or the home. Now, their thoughts are legitimate. You know, I can't complain about that. But what they're saying is it takes a full year for normal situations with probate, and they're just not sure if indeed all the creditors have submitted their bills. And then once a year has passed, then that's void and they can issue and feel comfortable with doing that. So how that will remain, I don't know. I think if that's something you're concerned about, and see, this would only apply is if you left your home to a person that wants to sell it right away. If they're no big toot to do that, then hey, it's not as big a deal to you. So what could you do? You could write a will, okay, and then the personal representative would submit that will for probate. The personal representative would have that notification to creditors. You've probably seen something like that in the newspaper. And if you haven't, take a look sometime. I've been looking at them lately since we've been talking about this. And what you discover is there's a 4-month window for an individual to, or a creditor to send their bills in so that it would be paid out of the estate. So that might be a better approach for you. It just depends. Does your beneficiary want to sell it right away? So my tip from the Explorer's Gentian is explore whether a transfer on death deed would really work in your situation, and take a look at that Mont Guide. Because when I first wrote that and the law was passed, I thought, oh, yay, and I'll get this out right away. But my co-author at the time said, Marsha, there's more to think about. And so she encouraged me to add all those extra things in there. So it'll take you a little bit to go through it, but it's well worth your time spent. Because one example is you need to decide how you're going to leave it to your beneficiaries. Is it going to be joint tenancy with right of survivorship, or is it going to be a tenancy in common? So those things are explained in the Mont Guide. So, Mandy, I think there's probably more that needs to be said about TODs. Why don't you fill us in?
All right. So you're looking at the foxglove, and we're gonna use the foxglove to talk more about TODs. So we're gonna talk about outfoxing the law. What if a designated beneficiary dies before the owner? So what if I've put that designated beneficiary on my property and then they pass away before me? So we want to be foxy and specify a successor beneficiary. So this allows you to name someone else instead or in addition to your first beneficiary. And also something else to think about is, say if you're a grandparent traveling with a grandchild, an accident could happen or something like that. And so your successor and you could pass away at the same time too. So you definitely want to name a successor beneficiary. So let's talk about Mark Fox. And so he files and records his transfer on death deed. So Mark has his son as a beneficiary, Evan, and Luke as his successor beneficiary. So he's named his successor. So we have Evan and Luke named as beneficiary and successor beneficiaries there. Sorry, I jumped ahead. I got so excited.
Whoops, there we go.
Yeah. So then if something were to happen to Evan, also then Luke would be our successor beneficiary. So the other thing that we could think about is having Luke and Lily as our successor beneficiaries both. So if Evan has 2 children and wants to name, or if Mark, excuse me, would like to name his grandson and granddaughter both as successor beneficiaries, you can do that. So the other thing that I noticed is in this example, it's half and half. But it doesn't have to be half and half. You can split it 40-60 or 80-20. You could split that up any way you'd like. You could also name a trust as a successor. So, so maybe Luke and Lily are still young, and so if our first beneficiary is Evan and something was to happen to Evan, then we could name the trust for Luke and Lily as a successor beneficiary as well. So our tip from our foxglove is to outfox the law by naming a testamentary trust as a successor for our designated beneficiary, if that's something that works for you. And so make sure that you look up the Mont Guide about that. And we have another estate planning trivia. So the Montana Right of Disposition Act allows disposition directions in 4 formats. So please name one of those formats in the chat room. And you will be the lucky, if you have the lucky answer, you will be the recipient of a beautiful wildflower card.
We'll just let them enter something. And, it's one of those weird names, disposition. What they're saying is what is going to be done with your body, basically. But they have to put those fancy words in there sometimes, I guess, to make it sound better. But what do you want done with your body? Well, there's 4 ways that you can say, this is what I want to have done. And I think the funeral directors are very excited about that because they're between family members sometime. I know there was an example of a lady who had said, I want to be cremated. And she announced it at Thanksgiving. And so the 2 daughters and the 2 sons heard this. But yet, when mom died, the 2 sons did not want to have her cremated, and the 2 daughters did. And so what you got is a fight. And the daughters wanted to honor mom's word, but the sons didn't. And here you are, the funeral director. What do you do? So I think it behooves all of us to indicate how we want to have our body disposed of or disposition of or whatever.
Thank you for sharing that, Marsha, because it is true. It is hard. It's hard to not be able to honor what you think might have been somebody's wishes or to have a disagreement about that. So the next flower we have is our blue flax. This is one of my favorites. I love this flower. And we're going to use this to talk about our Gary Blue and his 2 blue grandchildren. So Gary Blue is our owner, the father, and Linda Blue and Matt Blue are his granddaughter and his grandson. So Gary Blue files a transfer on death deed naming his granddaughter Linda as the designated beneficiary. And then later, Gary wrote a will leaving that same property to his grandson. So we have a transfer on death deed to Linda and a will leaving to his grandson, Matt. So our next poll question is, who gets the property when Gary Blue passes away? Is it going to be Linda, who was the designated beneficiary, or Matt, who was named in the will that was written after filing the transfer on death deed? So what do you think? And what a sticky situation.
Well, I prefer to think that maybe Gary maybe was starting to get Alzheimer's, and he wasn't doing this on purpose.
Oh, I'm sure.
But you never know. If we don't keep track of our PODs and TODs. And I got to admit, I was having a little bit of difficulty with that because I'm one of those that, let's have different kinds of investments. And so finally, I devised a TOD and a POD file so that I can just go right to that instead of having to use this great big file that has all the stuff about that investment in it. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got 30% saying Linda Blue, but unfortunately we have 70% that didn't answer. So I wish we could get you to answer and maybe let us know why you don't answer. Maybe you're on a cell phone or something like that and don't know how to do the polls. Or do you just find the polls are dorky? You could put in the chat room. That would give you an excuse to use that chat room. So we've got 30% saying Linda. So tell us about that, Mandy.
So that 30% is absolutely correct. So Linda Blue is going to inherit all of the property because you cannot change a contract with a will. So our transfer on death deed is a contract. And so that will can't change that.
Boy, I would want to have Christmas with them. I bet over the table, Matt's going to be saying, Dad wanted me to have it. He wrote the will later and it's mine and you should give it to me. You should disclaim it, something like that. And Linda, she's got it all.
Yep. And it also, so it puts the family in a conflict. So they're in a difficult situation during sad times, and Matt and Linda are also dealing with this conflict. So it's really making a hard situation even a little bit more difficult. And like Marsha said, we don't know, we assume that Gary, of course, wasn't doing this on purpose, but for whatever reason, this has happened. So it's going to be really important to make sure that those are in order, like Marsha said, and we're keeping track of those, so that we don't have Matt singing the blues. So something else to think about is we can also have a testamentary trust for the grandchildren, Greg, Joe, and Cindy Blue. So Gary Blue could put the testamentary trust as on the transfer of death deed, and that is also contractual, so that even if he had a will that stated other beneficiaries later, that property is going to go into the trust for the grandchildren. And in this case, that would put Matt and Linda both out, skipping a generation. So our tip is that you can't undo a transfer on death deed with a will, regardless of whether the will was written earlier or later than the filing date of the transfer on death deed. So a lot of times people think a will can change that, but it can't. So Marsha, will you tell us about the new vehicle and vessel law?
Well, yeah, this is something that the Montana legislature passed, and I'm going to use an evening primrose to use that example. And if you have a chance to see a primrose, take advantage of it, because tomorrow it won't be there. It'll be like the pink one. It just all wrinkles up, but they're beautiful when they're there and they smell so good. So what we've got is Even Primrose, and he wants his son Evan Primrose to have his super duper pickup truck. Okay. And the first thing I found is, well, we should really tell you what this vehicle and vessel law is. And these are the items that you can use a beneficiary designation on, thanks to this new law. And I was doing pretty good with all of them except a pole trailer. And I thought, if I admit I don't know what a pole trailer is, I won't be very Montanan. But Mandy, do you know what a pole trailer is? One to carry poles, I guess. Don't know.
But I would make something, my mind
you'll
make
know
something up, but I don't know if it's factual, so I won't share it.
Okay, well, these are all the things. And the form that you're going to use for this is MV13. And it is new, and so you may have to tell an individual, like I did. I was one that was buying a car after this went into effect. And this MV13 form is when you apply, like you buy a new vehicle, then you can fill out the form and they'll send it in with the rest of the documentation for the vehicle. And when you're purchasing also another used one, maybe that would be an opportunity to name a beneficiary. Once we have a beneficiary, then we'll have the opportunity, if we want to add someone else. So Mandy, I could add you, but I can't add 3 more people because they're limiting it to 2 individuals on the MV form. And once we've got one again, we can say, oh, I don't want Mandy to have it anymore. I want my hubby to have it. So I would name him. And what they do is put the beneficiary designation in the file in the motor vehicle department. The title that you get will not have the beneficiary's name on it, or at least that's what they say. So when I bought mine, my dealer told me that, well, when I said I wanted a beneficiary designation, they said Montana does not allow that. Now, I couldn't help but feel a little smug because I had the copy with me and I said, here, the legislature passed a new law. Well, nobody out at that place knew that. So that was an opportunity for some education. But what I discovered 3 months later when I got the title, guess what? There's no beneficiary designation on it at all. So you have the situation where they said it wasn't received. They said they sent it in, but with some investigation, we discovered it had not been sent in. So I'm still waiting for it, and I'm eager to see what it'll look like. And the other thing you can do once you've named a beneficiary, I get mad at Mandy and I say, I don't want you on my vehicle anymore. So I just revoke by filling out the form MV13. So it's a fairly easy form to fill out, but the circumstances of it. So of course, I'm working on a Mont guide. So I'm saying take advantage of the new law, name a beneficiary for your vehicle. And if any of you out there would like to review the Mont guide, double-spaced format, not real pretty, but I would encourage you, leave your name and mailing address in the chat room, and I'd be glad to send that to you so that we make sure that what we're sending out is accurate. And I am co-authoring that with the motor vehicle department head. So we, between the two of us, we hope it makes sense to the readers out there. Oh, here's another trivia. I hope I say this one right too. What is a Predimented Child? Predimented. I can't say it. Look at the word. Do you know what it is? I had to look it up because it was a part of the estate planning learn at home course that we have been providing through MSU Extension. So the first person that gets that one right gets a free card. Okay, Mandy, would you tell us one more way to avoid probate?
Sure. So I don't know if you remember the white mule's ears from before, but remember the phrase mom and dad or so-and-so is stubborn as a mule? So we're going to check back in with dad, the stubborn mule, who passes away and has joint tenancy with right of survivorship with his new wife. And so if the wife is surviving with joint tenancy, remember the wife is going to inherit everything, and the children aren't going to inherit anything. So we just need to remember that when we're putting things up. So how to transfer, we want to check out this Mont guide, how to transfer real property owned in joint tenancy in a life estate or without probate. So if that's your intention, is to have the wife inherit everything, then that's perfect because it's going to transfer immediately. So just check out this Mont guide, which will go into a lot more detail. The other thing that we need to do is we still need to remove their name from the property. And there's a little bit of a process to do that. So there's a form, an affidavit for termination of joint tenancy, and you can find that on our website. It's also available on the webinar website. So I don't know if we can jump ahead a slide, Marsha.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Duh.
So our affidavit for termination of joint tenancy, and you can get the resources for that available on our website. And it's also on the website for this webinar. So the website that you went to register, you can find that form there. So our reminder is that joint tenancy does avoid probate, but we still need to remove the deceased person's name to make it easier for survivors and heirs. And that's our tip from our white mule's ear. So remember that. So our time is slipping away. Once again, we hope that we have steered you to an awareness of the various ways that parents and grandparents can transfer property to their children and grandchildren without the cost of probate. In case you don't have a memory like an elephant, we can remember this elephant's head, and definitely use the Montana State University Extension Mont guides. There's 50 different topics, different mock guides related to estate planning. So you can go and look at those, and Marsha does a wonderful job of staying up to date with everything that's new and current. So those are great resources to check out if you remember you wanted to learn more. So also don't forget, the mock guides or the fact sheets are available from your local county or reservation offices. So this is a great reason to stop in the office and check in with your local extension agent, and they'll be happy to print those off for you and find those. And you can also check in and see what other programs they have going on. So let's go through our answers from our trivia questions. So e-sheets, I also was nervous saying that, is when a descendant's property goes to the state because there aren't any heirs. So it happens sometimes that people just don't have any heirs and they don't name a beneficiary, and the state of Montana inherits their property. So the Montana Right of Disposition Act allows the disposition, allows for 4 formats. So Marsha, do you want to tell us what the 4 formats are?
Okay, sure. You can have a prepaid contract with the funeral director. That's one method. There's writing, a written disposition direction. Okay. And you can have a signed affidavit saying, for example, I want to be cremated. Okay. And then they also allow for a videotaped, they say, but now I think we would say a recording of a disposition direction. So what those 4 methods are meant to do is to say that this is your way of seeing what you want to have done. And the funeral director is supposed to honor that. If the kids want to get in a fight, that's their business, but there's no sense going to court over it because you have a method that you've said, this is what I want to have done. And in Montana, we have a very high cremation rate. And I thought, well, okay, that's what I like. And so I told my dad, and he was not happy about that. And it was good because we had the discussion. And what he had cited to me is he was in World War I, and he was stationed in the Philippines, and they had various planes that would crash and burn as a result of things. And he said that was something he never forgot, was the smell. And so that's why he was really opposed to cremation. So, but you get to decide if you are the person. And then the last one here is about the Predimented Child. But this would be an example like somebody wrote their will and then later on they had another child. Well, that other child that was born later would have the same opportunity to inherit as the first 3 that you had. So we're not going to leave out the 4th one. And that's just the term that they use to refer to those. So goodness, Mandy, it's time for us to interview our special guest. So I'm going to stop sharing and
All right. So welcome and thank you for joining us, Jane and Katrin. We really appreciate your time and you joining us. And we'll just start with a really general question for both of you. We'll start with Jane and then Katrin, you can answer next. But will you share with us what prompted you to get started with your estate planning?
Well, as I thought about estate planning, and I just want to make sure you can hear me all right. Great, because I, would hate to go on and nobody hear anything I say. I really, looking back, credit my mom a lot for how I got started with estate planning, and that was due in large part to her dedication to financial education for me. When I was in 6th grade, Mom marched me into a bank and we opened up a checking account and I started learning how to balance my checkbook. And that education continued on. I did have the benefit of a great home ec teacher. Today we'd call that family consumer science, I believe. But she taught us things like renter's insurance and how to purchase a home and vehicles and so on and so forth. And then, of course, my 4-H experience raising 4-H market beef allowed me the opportunity to have some income that I invested. And again, Mom and Dad coached me on that. Mom took me to the bank. We had certificates of deposit that were invested for college. And So I think all that goal setting, when you really think about what estate planning is, it's a lot of financial education, planning, and goal setting. And I remember being 26 years old, single, and buying my first home. And I wanted to make sure that I was protecting others because I did not want them to be saddled with my decisions. So I went and bought life insurance. And that's, again, that protection piece of estate planning. So I think probably just those habits that started really early on. And of course, I think probably around high school, college years, I started getting exposure to Marsha Goetting and MSU Extension's resources. So that has been pretty solid in my life for a lot of years. It's been a while since high school, so I've had that for a bit. And then also I remember a program that we taught for Extension called Small Steps to Health and Wealth. And those resources are still available online. But one of their challenges that they put forward was learn something new about money every week. And I think our Mont guides, our Solid Finances webinars are just great ways to learn something new from a credible resource that's free, that you can trust. So I guess that, of course, from sixth grade, I've had lots of different things go on and different ways that I need to plan financially. But I just really, a lot of people hear the word estate and they think, oh, you've got to have something, a lot of something for an estate. And I think you really need to have a financial plan as part of it.
Thank you, Jane. Katrin, what you want to share with us your story of how you got started?
Sure. So I think my learning in estate planning started at a very young age. I grew up with a parent who is a lawyer and she does family law. And so estate planning is part of that world. So whenever she could have a captive audience, which was at the dinner table, car ride home from practice, or a long car trip, we took a lot of long car trips, we were either hearing about various cases or situations that she was encountered with in her practice, or she was sharing with us tidbits in how preparing for the future can help immensely and help kind of reduce any of those family disasters after you're gone. So I would say it's been kind of a common theme in my life, but I also know when my daughter was born, that was really when estate planning kind of came to the forefront. It was always in the background with my mom as a lawyer, but it never was like, oh yeah, that's important. And then after I had my daughter, or after we had our daughter, it was like, oh, that is really important. The other thing that was helpful, and Jane had mentioned this, was life insurance. So my parents had started a small little life insurance policy for me when I was born, and they were able to add to that each year as I had grown. And so when I turned 21, they had shared that with me and put that into my name. And so that's when I really started to understand some of the concepts and looking at beneficiaries and what that might mean for the future. And then as I got married and now have a daughter, those things have continually been in the forefront looking ahead.
All right, well, thank you for sharing your perspective also. My next question is, Jane, tell us a little bit about what you considered when you were choosing a guardian for your children.
I think that for me, Mandy, was one of the bigger hangups in trying to maybe write a will and some different things, because my husband Darren and I both have siblings, but none of them seem to be at a spot where it wouldn't kind of upset or add a lot of stress to their own families because of the ages of their children. For many years, the age of ours would have impacted so greatly somebody else's household and family. And the other thing that really, for me, especially was important to consider is that they would have the least disruption of their daily lives, because losing both parents at the same time would be a tremendous disruption anyway. And so all the other things that you could keep stable, in my mind, were really important. And that really drove the decisions. I wanted to have the least amount of disruption and the highest maximum possible emotional support, because we were using life insurance to take care of the financial support. And I felt like we were doing our part that way. So those were the really writing factors: how to create the least amount of stress and disruption on someone else's household based on their situation, both financial, marriage, children, etc. And then how to create the least disruption for our children, maximizing the support that they would have in the event of both parents passing.
And Katrin, will you share some of the things that you considered?
Yeah, and we are still considering, and this is one of the things that I think it's okay to acknowledge, that it's the decisions that you make at one point in your life or your children's lives can evolve. And I've had a lot of conversations with my mom, who I have asked her, how did you guys handle that? What did that look like? Because I've got two younger sisters and they're quite a bit younger than me. And so we're all at various stages in our life. And so when we were younger, my mom had similar thoughts to what Jane had discussed in terms of how can we keep things steady without disrupting everything in our children's lives, as well as who might be helping take care of the children. So in our household, we've talked about distance from the current location. Again, I have a younger child, and so thinking about that consistency and people that she's close with and connected with. I will also tell you that the conversation and the decisions that we have made it's kind of always on the table. We know that if we need to or want to change it, we can. My husband and I adore our respective families, and so sometimes we have gotten into long discussions about where our daughter should go and who might be best. And those conversations are really tough, but they're important to have, and to hear each other out and have that respect for each other's opinions and thoughts. And eventually we have made a pro-con list for various people in our lives to help determine where our child might go.
It's a really good tip. That's actually a really good way to kind of process that information. So I'm glad that you shared that, because it is really difficult.
And Mandy, I'm not family, but I just adore Katrin's daughter. So, you can add me on the list if you want.
She is a sweetie.
I'll add you to that pro-con list.
I don't want to see it though. I don't want to see my cons.
Yeah, no.
So Jane, I know that you're, as Marsha shared, your children, like mine, are adults now, which is a weird phase of life to enter into when you realize you no longer have any minor children. So share with us how you've changed or adapted your plans, or if you have, and what that process has looked like as they're getting older.
Well, so my oldest, by the end of this week, will be 21. My youngest just turned 18. As they aged, my concerns about their guardianship became less and less pronounced. I became more and more relaxed that the things I wanted to teach them and set them up for in life were fairly intact. And so that, and I always kind of felt that as they got older, if something happened to both Darren and me at the same time, that somebody would consult with them as to where they wanted to go. They were getting old enough. So there's a relief in that. I had a holographic will. And I pulled that out in the last couple of weeks and looked that over and thought, okay, it's time now with those changes in their ages, they're both legal adults, to do something different. The way it sits now, most everything that we have has the TOD, the POD, they're listed as beneficiaries. So using the, what happens if you die without a will website that Marsha has created, pretty much everything transfers how we want anyway. But this year we had the opportunity to kind of get up close and personal with the personal representative duties. My daughters have come through a loss, as my husband and I. My father-in-law passed away in the spring, and knowing how much pressure that personal representative piece is, we have started to have discussions as a family. And my husband this fall was unusually ill, and very suddenly so. We did not know at the time when he was ill that our daughters were conversing by phone, visiting about what happens if both mom and dad die. And so it was several weeks later that they talked to us about what their plans were. And I have to say, such a relief to know that what they had planned, and I mean, it was very specified, even with timelines. They had thought it through, and it was pretty much spot on with what we would choose and what we would have recommended to them. That makes us feel pretty good about that. But I do think probably we will start looking at either whether I'll do another holographic will and name one or the other of my daughters as a personal representative. We have discussed it recently as a family and what those duties would entail, and if they'd want somebody else to have that. They feel like they could take that on, and I actually also feel, even though my daughters are just 21 and 18, that they, in the discussions we have, I feel very rest assured that they would be fine with that. Also, I just mentioned that financial education piece. I listened to a book years ago called Cleaning House, and I got a great tip from the author. And so my daughters, both when they've been juniors in high school, have had to pay all of the family's bills, know all of the passcodes, know all of the accounts where everything is held, go through all the files. And so my oldest daughter did that for 2 months the year she was a junior. My youngest daughter is a senior in high school now, and she actually, because of all the caregiving going on in our situation last spring, paid 3 months worth of family bills. So at this point, they're very, very well aware of the intricacies and locations and assets and everything. It's pretty clear for them what things are. So if that, hopefully that answers the question a little bit. Our considerations in our family, just straight conversations about what the challenges will be and what the responsibilities will be and how to protect those assets if they inherit, because we have term life insurance. So we both went at the same time. They would probably have quite a bit of financial reserve to operate from.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And the tip about paying the bills. I remember when my daughter must have been taking a personal finance class in high school, and she came home. They had been talking about credit cards and really drilling into them, like you have to pay that off every month, or you have to make your payment every month. And in their day and age, they don't see us sit down with the checkbook anymore and pay bills the same way that I saw my parents do that. And so she actually was asking us, like, I get that you have to pay it, but I don't understand how. Do you have to drive to do you hand them cash? How do you pay this bill? Which was so interesting to me that she didn't have a concept of what that looked like. So great move. That's a really good idea, Jane.
Yeah, we are organized enough. We have a bill chart, what days they're due, and all of the details there. So
that is awesome. That is a great resource. So we have a couple questions, and I haven't checked the chat, but what are some tips that you would pass on? So Katrin, what's your favorite tool, and what are some tips that you would pass on?
There are probably a whole bunch of them. But as I have listened to my mother share all about estate planning, I listened, but I never actually heard what things were she was trying to get across to me. And so while I'm familiar with a lot of the terms, sometimes they don't always make sense. And I did not know of these resources before I started my career in extension, but seriously, the mock guides in the estate planning world have certainly helped me to understand and also to relay that information to my husband. Because of his background, he doesn't have any familiarity with any of those estate planning topics. So I can explain them to half make sense, but having that paper copy and not having him read case law or read the Montana code, having those simple definitions has been super helpful. The other tip that I would say, and Jane actually just talked about it a little bit, but is having those conversations with those people that may be involved in what happens if something happens to you, involving my mom, my stepdad, involving other family members, involving friends. How can they, things that they might be asked to do in terms of taking care of our daughter or stepping up to help get things rearranged in the house. Just those conversations and involving those people that are involved has been really, really helpful for us. And that has also brought light to various situations that maybe we weren't aware of, and has helped us make decisions in who we have named as a guardian for our daughter. So, and that's where that pro-con list has also come in handy. Like, oh, we had no idea that was going on. Okay, let's revisit that list. And then we always try to check back in with those people, the individuals we have named, or the individual we have named as a guardian, checking in with them. We review all of our information every year about tax time. It just kind of makes sense. And so reviewing those beneficiaries, reviewing where assets and those debts are allocated, and making sure everybody is on the same page.
Those are wonderful tips. Fantastic tips. So Jane, do you have any tips? And what is your favorite tool?
Yeah, I will jump in and echo what Katrin said. I think the MSU Extension free resources, and I did know about those way back in high school. So I have been using those resources for a really long time. Appreciate all of Marsha's dedication to keeping those up to date. I find that as a way to educate myself ahead of time so that I don't have to pay an attorney to do the education. I can get that for free, and then I can go in with, questions if I have them, so on. I also personally, not endorsing this as an extension agent, but I do follow a few money blogs and podcasts. Jean Chatsky is one that I follow quite routinely. So in terms of that, learn something new weekly about money. One of the biggest tips I think, though, that I learned as a parent was I was doing a series of articles for the newspaper, local newspapers, and I interviewed all the attorneys in our county at the time. So it was this time of year, February, and the series was Taking Care of the Ones You Love. And I asked all the attorneys a lot of similar questions, and one was, how do you choose guardianship? Because that was definitely on my mind. One of the attorneys said this. He said, so if you are not getting your act together, your paperwork in order, your will written, whatever, solely on the hang up about guardianship, if that's your holdup, he said, do you know someone who makes good decisions? And I said, well, yeah, I know someone I have all kinds of confidence in as far as making decisions, and who would not be emotionally distant from, but would not be as emotionally invested as other people, perhaps, so it was not a family member. And he said, name that person in your will to choose guardianship. And that was such a relief to me, Now, I would encourage anybody listening to check with an attorney to make sure that that's still a case, but that was really a weight lifted because I felt like no matter what the dynamics were as they changed in our lives, what the dynamics were as they changed in the lives of our siblings, our parents, etc., and our daughters, that that person could interview the people close to them. They could interview clergy, they could interview my daughters, they could interview the families who were stepping up saying, but I want them. All of that would have been kind of in the mix of people being considered. And that was just huge to me, to not be hung up on making that decision and then always feeling like you needed to revise. Never thought of keeping a continuous pro and con list like Katrin and Eli. So that would definitely help. Also really relieved we're done with that. To have made it through and they're adults, and while they will still need support, I do think we have really good people in our lives and in place who would come swooping in, arms around them, coaching them through all of the next steps if my husband and I were gone.
Thank you, Jane. So, Carrie, are there any questions in our chat that our participants have asked? Or Marsha, if you can see those too. Marsha, if you're talking, you are muted.
I didn't mute me. Okay, thank you. I've looked at the chat room and I'm not seeing any questions, and I realize we're past our time. So what we want to do is just say a huge thank you to Katrin and to Jane for sharing with us. And I would also like to extend a special appreciation to Mandy for agreeing to co-host this with me. And we've had a great time sharing the information. We have recorded these, so if you have some friends that would like to see what they missed, be sure and let them know that the recordings are there with the Minor Children website. So for now, we'll say that's it. Continue to be safe, keep healthy, and don't forget, Extension is your resource in the estate planning area as well as many others. And I'm supposed to be at another meeting, so I'm going to sign off and say take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.